welcome, very welcome. And I'm going to hand over to our moderator, Azmin Khan, who is the practice manager for the Governance Global Practice. Good morning and welcome.
Here's your seat.
All right, Azmin, are you ready?
Yeah.
Now, this is the dinosaur crocodile I was referring to. It's a dinosaur.
Is my mic on?
All right, your mic is on. Look at this.
Good morning,
in case
everybody.
You didn't recognize her.
I'm not as good as Simon at this, but I thought just to kind of razz things up, I would get in the spirit of Halloween and wear my dinosaur head. It's not my normal attire in the office, but given the space, the room, the Halloween goodies on the table, I just couldn't resist when somebody walked into my office and handed it to me today. So first, let me just say who I am. My name is Azmin Khan. It's a bit difficult to speak with this on, so I'll take it off. I am the practice manager for strategy and operations in the Governance Global Practice, and the Global Partnership for Social Accountability is one of the teams that reports to me. But at heart, I am a big social activist, and many years ago, I used to work for Oxfam and the Ford Foundation, so supporting CSOs and working for CSOs is built in my DNA as well. And I also, with Maninder Gill from the GP for Social, Urban, and Rural Resilience, lead our work on citizen engagement in the World Bank. So this is a great opportunity for all of us to hear from you about ideas and opportunities for the World Bank to collaborate more closely with civil society organizations like yourself. So let me just start by introducing our very esteemed panel. We're very delighted to have, I have to put my glasses on since I can't read my cards anymore. We're very delighted to have the Auditor General, the Honorable Auditor General from Nepal, Mr. Tankamani Sharma, Dangal. Mr. Sharma holds an MBA and his prior positions included Secretary of the Office of the Prime Minister and Council of Ministries, Ministry of General Administration and Procurement. He served in many different positions in the government. He's here because he hopes to build a more transparent public administration, promote good governance in the country through a transparent and accountable public sector financial management. Moreover, he has emphasized to promote Supreme Audit Institute Nepal's professional integrity, build effective relationship with stakeholders, and strengthen partnerships with bilateral and multilateral cooperation. So it's a great pleasure to have Mr. Sharma here, and he's come a long way to be with us right now. Thank you so much. Next, we have Suchi Pandey, who is an Indian researcher and activist. She was secretary of the National Campaign for the People's Right to Information and worked with a very famous organization called MKSS. I worked in this state in India where it started, Rajasthan, and it really came up with the whole right to information movement in India, which then spread around the world. Suchi received her PhD from the Institute of Development Studies at Sussex and is scholar in residence at the Accountability Research Center at American University in DC, just around the corner. So great to have you, Suchi, on the panel. And then we have Vivek Ramkumar, who is from the International Budget Partnership, one of our co-sponsors. He is currently Senior Director of Policy and oversees research and advocacy efforts to expand the adoption of transparent and accountable budget systems around the world. He also worked for MKSS, its a previous incarnation, and pioneered the right to information movement in India. Vivek is a chartered accountant. He also has an MA from the London School of Economics. So we'll hear more about what IBF is doing in this area. And then finally, I have a great pleasure to announce my colleague, Adenike Oyeyole, who's the practice manager for governance standards, codes, and systems in our Governance Global Practice. Her unit covers corporate financial reporting, standards and codes for transparent financial management in public and private sectors. She also covers areas around digital solutions for governance, public expenditure, and the PIFA Secretariat, the Public Expenditure Financial Assessments Secretariat, is in her unit. She has worked in some very interesting places like Afghanistan and many countries in Africa and South Asia, and has led dialogue and provided strategic advice to government and private sector, and she's a chartered accountant by training. So I know Yesterday, I saw 11% of people don't know much about public financial management. I hope by the end of the session it'll be like 0%. Feel free to ask basic questions about public financial management. So yesterday, I had the opportunity to sit in on the opening session and the closing session. And the thing that struck me was Annette's presentation in the morning where she talked about the human capital index and what 0.6 meant. And 0.6 meant if your country was rated at 0.6, that it meant a child only had a 60% chance of achieving the standards of education and health, or achieving that by the time they reached a certain age. So it really helped kind of visualize this whole issue about why it's so important to invest in human capital, and where making sure that budgets are directed to support education and health is really critical in building human capital. But it's not just making sure that money is available, but it's making sure it's used in an accountable and effective manner. And this is where all of you come in, and I think many of you have a lot of experience on the ground in making sure that is really the case of how it happens. So it'd be really good for our panels to reflect a little bit about this accountability gap that exists in the way budgets are allocated and then actually used. And I know all of you have a lot of experience in that area, so maybe reflect a little bit on it as you respond to your questions. So the way we're going to run this panel is we allow each of the speakers to talk for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll have a series of questions to the speakers, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask them questions as well. So without any ado, I'll talk to Mr. Tankar Sharma to say a few words.
Okay, I go there?
No, you can just speak from here, wherever. I think this is, yeah, this is on.
I'll take around 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you, Jasmine. Dear facilitator Jasmine, distinguished panel speakers, distinguished participants of the program, very good morning and namaste. We say namaste in Nepal. First of all, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation and thanks to World Bank for inviting me at this August gathering as a panel speaker. My special thanks goes to Mr. Jeff Thindwa for consulting and making available me the forum. I wish every success of this forum. Today, as per the prescribed format, I would like to highlight some of the insight points of Nepal's public financial management system. A special focus will be given in the citizen involvement in public financial management. In this session, I would focus on budgetary participation, a right to information and its application, auditing system, and citizen participation in audit practice. Some opportunities and challenges will also be discussed. Nepal, as you know, I think, is a federal democratic republic country shifted from unitary governance system to 3-tier of federal governance systems, with having federal 7 provinces and 753 local level governments. Altogether, there are 761 government in Nepal, with having exclusive and concurrent authorities. Yeah. I will talk a little bit about the federal budget system and local level budget system, as well as right to information and the citizen participatory audit system. In the federal system, there are 2 types of budget. We generally, worldwide, we prepare revenue budget and the expenditure budget. For the revenue budget in the federal governance, the projection and for the projection of the revenue budget and the policy, there will be a revenue advisory committee having sectoral subcommittees with government and non-government participations. Based on the subcommittee's report, the committee prepare the final recommendations for the policy of the coming fiscal year and submits to the finance minister. As per the recommendation made by the committees, the finance ministry prepare the revenue projection and policies for the coming fiscal year. Regarding the federal expenditure budget, at the beginning of the fiscal year, the budget cycle, every ministry and budget units will give a ceiling. Based on that ceiling, the ministries and the department or the constitutional bodies collect their budget and proposal and submit to the Ministry of Finance. After getting from various ministries, the Finance Ministry will finalize the budget and submit to the Cabinet for the approval. After getting approval from the Cabinet, the Finance Minister, through his budget speech, it becomes public in the Parliament. And when the Parliament approve the budget, that will come into effect. It is a general practice all over the world, I think. The main point is where is the involvement of CSO, because this is a social accountability forum. So for revenue policy and estimation, workshops and interactions will be held in different parts of the country. All the relevant stakeholders will be invited, including media, private sector, civil society organizations, for suggestions, feedback, and comments. In expenditure side, also different line ministries and field officers held discussion with the concerned stakeholders and collect suggestions, especially for program and capital budgets. There will be a full participation in budget preparation system. Likewise, in transparency, Finance Ministry has to submit economic survey incorporating all the economic activities of the nation to the Parliament, and subsequently the last year's ministry-wise budget performance and performance of public enterprises. It means in the provincial and almost same practice prevail in provincial level as federal level. So what it happened is, for summary in revenue budget, there will be a committee and that consult to all the stakeholders and submit the suggestions to the Finance Minister. For expenditure side, it will also be consulted with the concerned stakeholders and finalize the budget, and from the speech of the Finance Minister, it will be public. For local level program and budget, it is very much extensive and comprehensive than federal level, because since 2015, we have entered into federal three-tier of government, and there are separate local level government with having full authority of legislative and executive from the constitutions. So at the local level, Operation Act is there, 2017, which ensure the full participation in budget planning and implementation. The main objective of the Act is promote cooperativeness, coexistence, and coordination between the federal, province, and local level, and deliver efficient and quality service by ensuring people's participation, accountability, and transparency. So CSOs are engaged in various steps of the budget preparation and implementations. Local bodies should encourage to accomplish local development activities through consumer groups or consumer society. It has to encourage the NGOs in identification, formulation, approval, operation, supervision, evaluation, repair, and maintenance of the local development activities. In local planning also is developed with the help or participation of the community or local social organizations. The community participation also is ascertained for the preparation of a program and budget. Like it would be unique to you all, like women, lower caste, indigenous group, Madhesi, Tharu, Muslim, exclusion, remote area, minorities, marginalized, youth, children, elderly citizens, gender minorities, differently able, backward classes, people also has to be consulted or participated in the meeting. Likewise, in the local community development committees, mother groups, children club, network, youth clubs, citizen awareness forums and centers, and other groups who are there in the community must be invited for the participation of the preparation of budget and program in the local level. Generally, there is municipality and village municipality. Under there, the area is divided into 4, 5, 6, or 7 based on the population and the geographical area. So the ward chair, who is the local area chair, would invite all the communities to participate in the budget preparation phase with publishing a public notice with a time and date. So this is a fully, I think, participatory type. So the citizen role in governance are in local level: voters, service seeker, taxpayer, development stakeholder, user committee member, in-service beneficiary, watchdog, regulation, and judicial case mediators. So that means it is fully participative in the formulation and the implementation of budget in the local level. In our case, after the new constitutions, budget dates are fixed in the constitution for the federal budget and for other budget in the government, local government operation act. For example, for the federal budget, the budget must be submitted on the 15th of Jet. That means at the end of May. It is stated in the constitution. For the province, it should be submitted in 15 June and local level by 24 June. And the local level approval budget should be placed in the public website before 31st July. I will mention a little bit about the transparency and participation of the budget, which the survey was conducted by Vivek Ram Kumar ji and his colleagues from IBP. The International Budget Partnership Survey indicates open budget index is 52 by 100, that is 52%. In 2006, it was 36%. That means it has increased during this period. Public participation is 24. From this year, I think it will be significantly increased as
We hope.
new provision in local level governance system, because before it was not the local level government into function. So last year the federal, provincial and local level election has been held, and now full-fledged about 35,000 people representative or politicians representing various organizations are there. So I think from this year, it will definitely be increased, I hope, the involvement or the participation in the budget. Budget oversight by legislature is 44%. SAI budget oversight score is 78%, which is Vivek Kumar ji mentioned it is adequate, I think. And audit report comprehensiveness is 62, which also stands substantial. I think next year we may increase in this. There is right to information. Fundamental rights of information is guaranteed by the constitutions. There are 31 fundamental rights, including right to information. The Right to Information Act is enacted in 2007. The formation of National Information Commission, which is actively working for the promotion, dissemination, and implementation of right to information to citizens. So as per the Act, there is not a specified budget or public financial management or other information has not been really classified. Information means any type of information of public importance that could be financial or non-financial information. And complaints are related with public service, financial matters, development, procurements, and etc. Regular information seekers have to receive the information from the public bodies. Public bodies really covers government agencies, NGOs, and the political parties as well. So it is a very broad definition. If anybody denies to provide the information, there is a provision to issue order from the National Information Commission and provision of punishments also. To implement Act, regulations has been made and circulars has been issued by the National Information Commission. For the flow of information, citizens shall have access to information in all the public bodies. Let me turn a little bit about the government auditing system, what I'm doing since 1.5 years. As per the Constitution, there shall be an Auditor General who is appointed by the President under the recommendations of the Constitutional Council. The Constitutional Council is headed by or chaired by the Prime Minister, and the members are Chief Justice, Speaker of the House of Representatives and Chairman of the Upper House, as well as Deputy Speaker, and Leader of the Opposition Party also is the member in the Constitutional Council. The Auditor General has the power to determine the scope and methodology of audit and has the authority to conduct audit all the federal, provincial, and local level government offices and state-owned enterprises. On the basis of, we have 5 bases to conduct audit: regularity, economy, efficiency, effectiveness, and propriety. The audit report submitted to the President. The report led to the Parliament through Prime Minister and held discussion in Public Account Committee. AG may present provincial level report to the province chief. The Auditor General, through press conference, make public the report right after submitting the President and will be kept in the website. That is transparency. When I submit the report to the President, coming back immediately after coming back from the President office, I organize a press conference and disseminate all the information and will be kept in the website for the transparency. For citizen participation in audit, start from the top level, from the policy level. I mean to say, to conduct audit function effectively and efficiently, there is a high-level audit advisory committee under the chairmanship of Auditor General. That means under my chairmanship, there is a high-level audit advisory committee to provide suggestions and feedback. The committee is represented by dignitaries in different fields, like, for example, at present, former chief of the constitutional bodies, including former Auditor General, former vice chairs of the National Planning Commission, former governor of the Central Bank, former chief secretary and secretaries, professors, women representative, chair of Transparency International, Nepal, are the members. And suggestions will be received during planning, execution, and reporting stage of the audit. We generally issue public notices in national newspapers inviting general public for information and to cooperate with audit teams deployed at the field level in various parts of the country. Okay. This is designated information officers. And before starting any audit circle or cycle, we generally held the entry meeting with the chief accounting officer. This year I started to hold meeting in presence of the Prime Minister with the chief accounting officers of the government ministries and with the Chief Justice, with their chief accounting officers and with speakers and the chairman of the House of Assembly with the audit of related audit to the Parliament. So we started this practice from the top, and we conduct performance audit with participation of civil society organizations. Last year, we conducted 8 performance audit with the participation of 25 CSOs in the field. This year, we are planning to conduct 12 performance audited and willing to engage civil society organizations. I would like to invite you all, if you are interested, please.
Open invitation to go and audit projects
Nepal,
in Nepal.
Otherwise, you can support from here also. We have a strategic plan and action plan, so there is also reflected the citizen civil society engagement in performance audit and dissemination. And citizen participatory audit guideline we have developed. There is a steering committee, the scope is stated there, and the basis for selection is public interest, availability of civil society organizations in the sector, possible impact in the contribution of funds and like that. And future plan is to citizen participation. It has been incorporated in the public financial management project supported by MDTF firm, which is recently came into implementation. It covers budget and technical support to CSOs, support preparation of revision of audit guidelines, performance audit collaboration, training, etc. So in this way, I think let me stop here. Later on, if you have any further questions or query at that time,
There'll be many questions.
I'll try my best to answer. This is what I mentioned is our system, and our system is fully civil society friendly in budgeting, in auditing, in like information dissemination system and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Suchi, over to you. Let's hear the civil society perspective.
Thank you, Asmin, and I'd like to thank Jeff and IBP for extending an invitation for me to participate.
Maybe you could just hold the
panel.
speaker a little closer.
Yeah,
much better.
Good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I will briefly talk about social audits in India. As many of you know, social audits are a participatory forum where citizens can basically question government functioning and government action. In India, social audits originated in a grassroots struggle in rural Rajasthan, which is a state in Western India, where workers and peasants on large-scale public works programs were trying to enforce minimum wage payments, which they knew were being embezzled by local political and government elites. In the initial stages of the struggle, the activists as well as the workers and peasants realized that it would be very difficult to hold local governments accountable if they did not have access to information. So this led them to spearhead a national campaign to enact India's National Right to Information Act. But it wasn't just about access to information. The activists also realized that they needed forums where they could interrogate what was in these government documents and examine to what extent they mirrored the actual reality on the ground. In response to this demand, there emerged a public participatory forum called the Jan Sunwai, which is roughly translated as a public hearing. And this became a place where citizens were able to interrogate and question government practices and government functioning. Movement-led social audits are used by several organizations and both civil society groups, grassroots groups, rights-based organizations. And really they're concerned with not just tracking government spending, but also sort of getting, unraveling whether or not that spending has made any difference at all on the ground. If social audits, and because of this kind of response that civil society has brought to both sort of developing and using social audits, activists were able to insert social audits into the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which, as many of you might know, is the largest public works program in the world. So if social audits are implemented well, they're deeply political, and they're largely resisted by people in power. For instance, in the state of Rajasthan, where the social audits originated, and where they really have and enable a much deeper form of citizen participation that goes beyond preventing corruption, they have been vulnerable to counter-mobilization by the government and local political elites. In other states, state governments have either just subcontracted social audits to any organization without any kind of monitoring of whether or not they're being done, or in some cases, they've simply ignored the legal mandate of social audit and not done anything about it. So activists, in the course of fighting for both inserting this clause into a national legislation, but also making sure that it's actually implemented on the ground, realize that they really needed to formulate a set of processes and procedures that would allow institutionalization of social audits across the country. This led to the formation of a collaborative sort of task force which had both civil society and state actors constituted by the government, but in which the Comptroller and Auditor General, which is the Supreme Audit Institution of India, played a mentoring role, realizing the limitations of its own performance and fiscal audit methodologies and procedures. The Comptroller and Auditor General realized the potential of social audits and civic participation in monitoring public finances. So what we've seen in the last 2 decades of the use of movement-led social audits, the institutionalization of social audits into a national legislation is really a comprehensive social accountability framework emerging, and I'll just outline 3 different models to give you a sense of what that looks like. So one is the Rajasthan-based movement-led social audits, which are organized by rights-based organizations, by civil society groups to hold governments accountable, and these are usually organized independent of government. The second kind of model is the institutionalized model of 2 southern Indian states called Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, where the state governments really bought into the idea of social audits and have organized uninterrupted social audits despite major political changes. So not just electoral changes, but this state was bifurcated and divided into 2 states, and the social audit process has survived in both those states. In a study that a colleague of mine and I conducted last year, in the state of Telangana with support from the Accountability Research Center, we found that in the state of Telangana, the social audits forums, more than 10,000 social audit forums have been organized across the state. So if you're thinking about social accountability at scale, this government is trying to do that, and it's doing it on an uninterrupted, ongoing basis. What we also learned from our study was that social audits are not just limited to detecting corruption. Here we're seeing the social audit agency take a real proactive role at grievance redress. So they're effectively seeking out and redressing workers' grievances so that they don't get caught up in the social audit process and can be redressed before that. But we also found a major obstacle to the social audit process, and this is a government-led social audit, and unfortunately, the government itself is a major obstacle. So social audits are conducted, the findings are brought out, and there is no follow-up, or there's a lack of responsiveness on behalf of the government. There's a third emergent model, and this is relatively new, and it's coming from a northeastern Indian state called Meghalaya. Last year, the state government in the state assembly passed the Community Participation, Public Service, and Social Audit Law. Essentially, what this law does is that it extends social audits beyond the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act in that state to 21 different social welfare schemes that cut across 11 different departments. So what they've essentially done is that they've created an administrative framework for auditing both government practice and not just limited to tracking money, but actually making sure that the budgeted amounts for each public service are actually making a difference on the ground. So this is just like a broad overview of the landscape of social audits in India. And there are tremendous challenges, and this has not been a smooth ride. There's been several ups and downs. But I think I'll stop here, and we can discuss more.
More opportunities to question. Thank you. That was great follow-on from Mr. Tanka's presentation. So Vivek, over to you. What is the IBF doing on this international budget project doing on this really important topic?
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here. As was mentioned, my name is Vivek Ramkumar, and I'm Senior Director of Policy at the International Budget Partnership. The IBP collaborates with civil society organizations and other stakeholders towards a world in which active and engaged citizens use open budgeting systems to shape policies and practices that promote equity and justice on a sustainable basis. Our work over the past 2 decades has shown us that the best way to manage public funds efficiently and equitably is through budget systems that are transparent, open to public engagement and scrutiny, and that have robust oversight institutions and mechanisms. Critically, while transparency and formal oversight have gained much legitimacy among policy practitioners as essential components of democratic accountability, the same cannot be said about public participation. Here, policy has not kept pace with theory. A Tanzanian colleague told me about his interaction with a finance ministry official whom he had met to discuss the need for public participation in budgeting. Annoyed by my colleague's persistent demands for public participation, the official turned to him and said, "You guys are never satisfied. Although we have met your demands for budget transparency, you're now demanding public participation in budgeting. It seems that it's not enough that we invited you for dinner. Now you demand to be taken into the kitchen." But my colleague was right in not being satisfied by greater transparency alone. He knows, as we do, that for appropriate checks and balances to be in place, budget systems need to be transparent and open to public engagement and scrutiny, and have robust oversight institutions and mechanisms. Such systems, in turn, can improve the collection and allocation of scarce national resources and thereby contribute to the achievement of national and international development objectives. It's not just anecdotes, but empirical evidence that also points to the challenges in advancing public participation. Our latest open budget survey shows that the global average score received by 115 countries on indicators of budget transparency in the survey is only 42 out of a maximum possible score of 100. But the performance of countries on public participation is far more dismal, with a global average score of only 12 out of 100. What this tells us is that while we have a long ways to go to achieve all elements of a robust budget accountability ecosystem, the area in which the majority of countries are weakest is on public participation. In some ways, these findings are relatively easy to explain. Norms on budget transparency and the constitutional role played by formal oversight institutions like legislatures are well developed and widely known and accepted by academia and practitioners. This is not the case with public participation. Over the past 2 decades, global institutions like the IMF, the OECD, the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and Intosai, the Audit Professional Network, have issued standards and codes on budget transparency and oversight. But it was only 3 to 4 years ago that the IMF revised its fiscal transparency code and for the first time introduced a standard calling for public participation in budgeting. This was considered to be a huge victory by those of us who have been advocating for participation to be mainstreamed in public finance management. But it is only the first step in achieving meaningful public participation in budgeting. In conclusion, let me emphasize that we do not think it is essential for every citizen to participate in every budget decision that is made. But we do think it is critical that governments change the way in which they view how budgets are managed and ensure that diverse voices are represented at different venues of budgeting. This will ensure that budgets are reflecting the priorities and meeting the needs of citizens. Thank you.
So Nika, nice segue to you because Vivek mentioned international kind of financial reporting standards. So this would be a great opportunity for you to talk a little bit about what the bank is doing in this area.
Okay, thanks, Asmin, for the introduction. Please permit my voice. And good morning, colleagues. I was quite interested and impressed with the poll. And let me say, I can't promise that at the end of this discussion, we'll all be public finance specialists. But I think I can promise that we'll have an opportunity to know what more we can do in aspects of accountability and being part of the process. It's for us as a governance global practice, and of course I'm with the World Bank, public finance, or let me call it public financial management, is very pertinent. And from the beginning to the end, from the planning, the budgeting, accounting, reporting, up to implementation and external scrutiny, these are core parts of what makes a government keep moving. The interesting part is the planning, the budgeting, the accounting, the reporting is becoming easier because there are some, let me say, instruments or apparatus that are used to support the processes. For instance, we have digital technology that is helping in planning, in budgeting, in accounting, in reporting, so that makes life easier. Budget, again, because, well, let me say politicians or whoever is preparing the budget knows that they need to use this as an instrument to make people know or feel that they are doing the right thing. And again, because of the scrutiny by the legislators, you have very good budgets. This link or the core part that is not well done right now is the implementation, which is the fiscal discipline. The Vivek will probably have a global perspective of the deviation between budget and implementation. And perhaps even the Auditor General can talk specifically of the Nepal situation. There are great deviation between what is budgeted and what is implemented. And this is basically because there is no fiscal discipline. And my question then is, how can we ensure that there is fiscal discipline? How can you and I and every one of us be a part of accountability? And I think there's a lot that can be done by everybody in ensuring that this process moves forward. 3 core things I would actually like to speak to in this introduction. The first part is that there is a growing and large need for involvement for public involvement in public finance. And, there was a recent World Bank study, and the indication was that the political economy is there, and there is need for involvement, but the involvement is still very low. And the report further emphasized that the reason for this low involvement is probably because of the fragmentation of civil society organizations, of the citizens, of the people that should intervene in the involvement, that should collaborate to ensure that there is accountability. I'll give 2 examples where collaboration of that sort can be very pertinent. One is the Malawi case, and I know GPSA colleagues are really working very strongly with them. I mean, I heard of the Malawi Economic Justice Network, who are collaborating with some other partners to, working closely on education to make sure that all the gaps are blocked. And my understanding is that, over 4 years, there was a dramatic 85% savings in education. And for many of us, we'll say the students are not bright. How can the students be bright when they don't have the necessary resources, when the resources are not well spent or not, well implemented? So I think that's a very strong, example of collaboration that every civil society organization, every citizen should, really build on. Another example is of development partners. Many of us would have heard about the platform for collaboration on tax, which is between the World Bank, the IMF, OECD, and the United Nations. And what that is helping to do is to make sure that domestic resource mobilization is, really done very effectively in countries. Illicit financial flows, are blocked. All these, all sorts of tax inefficiencies are really blocked. So this, again, is an example of collaboration, one for civil society organizations, another on the part of the development partners. A second point that I really need to talk, and which is now pertinent for what is happening right now, is on human capital development. This actually is the core of everything that we do, and it's becoming a major issue that the bank and development partners are, really becoming important on. And for us in governance, in public finance, in public financial management, we are collaborating with the units, the health units, the education units, with social development, to make sure that we really delve into working to make things happen, to make human capital a core part of what is happening. And I think accountability, collaboration is a thing that can help us improve on education, improve on health. For instance, the PFM units, the public financial management units in the bank, is working very strongly with the health sector of the bank, and of course with the countries as well, to make sure that we do some diagnoses to make sure that the funds that are meant for health are used for health. So that's a core part, and I think every one of us should be part of this. I think a core part, again, that every one of us can also work on is follow up the money. Development partners are putting a lot of money into health, into education, into all these parts of human capital development. We can be part of following up the money. The information is opened. Everybody knows how much the World Bank, for instance, is putting to health in Malawi, in Nigeria. We have a responsibility to also follow through and make sure the money is used for the purpose intended. So I think that's an aspect of accountability that we all need to work on. And for instance, we know that the GPSA is partnering with some CSOs in Argentina to follow up the funds, to follow up the money. I think this is a core part of what we need to do. The third point I would probably like to make is tapping opportunities to push social accountability and participatory process in what we do in public policy, in public financial management. And a core part of it I would like to bring out is on domestic resource mobilization. Many of us will probably know that for a country to run effectively, at least 15% of the GDP, 15% of the GDP, it must be from taxes. And we don't have that in so many countries, particularly in poor countries. we can, as civil society organizations, as partners in development, support governments, work with governments to make them accountable and make sure that at least this 15% is achieved. There is no country that can move very strongly in development if we don't have at least 15% in taxes. So many countries are not able to achieve this. And I think if this doesn't link, then there is no way we can have effective accountability. I must actually close by saying we in the Governance Global Practice believe very strongly in what GPSA is doing in engaging with countries and really moving the work on accountability forward. And we really hope this can go to a higher level to make sure that public finance is well accounted for and is well spent for purposes intended. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. So what I'm going to do now is ask each of the panelists one question because we're a bit short on time. Then I'm going to open it up to all of you because you've all been sitting very quietly listening to all of us. I want to get a bit of public participation going in this conversation. And I'm going to reflect a little bit in my questions on the kinds of points you raised in your presentations. So I'm going to start with Mr. Tanka Mani Sharma first. You mentioned the 750 some local bodies, right? And you know, they now have this, they're doing the budgets at the local level, they're inviting CSOs in. But what happens when there's an audit finding or a recommendation and the local body is not held? I mean, like, suppose you find something that this local body has done or they haven't used, the CSO in that local community says, you know, this is what the budget was and they spent it on something that they shouldn't have. What can your organization do to strengthen this collaboration with CSOs to make sure that action is taken when audit results come out and or the CSO has found something, and how do you strengthen that accountability relationship? Can you give some specific example of that you know?
Thank you. First of all, the local level audit is conducted by the Auditor General Office just since a year. Before having 3 tiers of government, federal, provincial, and the local level government, there was no system of audit to be conducted by the Auditor General, the private sector auditor, or the government entities themselves could audit the local bodies. For the first time, we are conducting the local body audit. It is difficult in a sense that they are geographically very scattered. And my Auditor General Office is located in the center only, and we are thinking or planning to open our provincial offices in
what can
near
CSOs
future.
do to help you?
Yeah, I will come in that point. The CSO will help, that means in different part. First is to dissemination of information. What is happening in the field level, it would not be possible to know from the central level or sitting in a capital city. So the CSOs are the most important stakeholders or the information provider to the Auditor General. So that's why what we do is at the beginning of the audit cycle, we publish a notice in national newspapers inviting all the citizens or CSOs to provide information regarding the development activities, service provision, expenditure or revenue activities, or any mismanagement or misappropriations in the field. So we gather that type of information, and before conducting audit in the field level, generally in the district level, we invite all the media, civil society organizations, government organizations, and hold this type of meeting. And we want to know about the weaknesses and the information relating to the public expenditure in the field level. So CSOs are, I think, in the preliminary stage to follow-up stage, it would be very much helpful. And we are collaborating in planning, execution as well as, but little in follow-up. For the first time, we are collaborating not in local level, we are collaborating with international level, also with IBP for the follow-up of the performance audits conducted in the previous years. So we very much appreciate, and that would be very much helpful to us because the Auditor General really want the information, what has happened in the field, without turning off each and every papers. If we know information, so by not going inside the papers, that would be very helpful to us. And we generally conduct the risk-based audit. It is very difficult to conduct one-to-one or one-by-one for about 10,000 units located in the central, provincial, and local level. So for the local level, I think civil society organizations would be the best partners to us to provide information and to, what I say is to implement the audit findings.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Do we have any CSOs from Nepal in the room? No?
Sir?
No, we don't. Otherwise, it'd be a great opportunity for some of them to contact you afterwards to see how they could get involved in the process. So we'll have some questions in a minute. Suchi, I'm going to turn over to you. You mentioned 3 really interesting examples of how the social audit movement in India has kind of taken on different shapes and forms. But what are some of the challenges? It's been over a decade plus of the whole social audit movement in India. Is it sort of going backwards? I mean, is the current political environment still sort of supporting social audits? I mean, I've been in touch with a lot of my colleagues in the movement in India, and there's sort of a feeling that the movement's going backwards.
No, definitely there are challenges, and under the current government, there isn't an open and explicit support for social audits, and that has actually forced sort of movements and civil society groups that are involved with social audit processes in different states to kind of, take some of their activism and advocacy and engage at the national level. So we are finding certain openings, like for instance, the Comptroller Auditor General has been really supportive of the social audit process, and with the legitimacy that they bring to auditing practices and the fact that they are a statutory body that is giving its support to a process like this and is actually inviting movements and civil society groups to be active partners in developing national standards and
rules. So auditors are friends.
So yes, for now, auditors are a good horizontal accountability institution that is supporting civil society. But I think the challenges at the ground level are somewhat more disheartening because the National Campaign for People's Right to Information keeps a registry of assaults and threats against activists, against transparency activists. And the last time I checked, it was 67 people who have died trying to access information and trying to put that information to use. And certainly the culture of impunity that surrounds this kind of actions, there is no response from the government at that front. So reprisals is certainly a big issue, and anybody who gets involved in either social audit processes or files a right to information request does so at a great personal risk. But I think there's also a third element of challenge. I know I shared 2 examples where state governments have been proactive and have come forward to kind of institute social audits. But in large part, I think in India, there's variation in state capacity and also in willingness to institute transparency and accountability processes willingly. So unless you have, if you have the same party that is in power at the national level and is also in power at the state level, and unless the national level gives a signal to the state level, they're not going to follow, they're just not going to go ahead and do whatever they want to do unless they get a signal. But if they do get a signal, which at least in the case of social audits, they have sent some subtle signals because of the role of this Comptroller Auditor General. So we're now starting to see social audits actually take shape. For example, the reason why they're listening to the Comptroller and Auditor General is because 3 years ago, the Supreme Audit Agency actually did a performance review of social audits across the country, and it found that in a handful of states, the social audit was somewhat kind of taking place, but in large parts across the country, there was not a lot being done. And so it literally sort of asked the government to kind of come on board and pull up its socks. And we've also, and I'll end here, is that we've also had the support of the Supreme Court of India, which in its recent decisions has really come forward and underscored the use of these auditing standards that have been developed by civil society activists and the Supreme Audit Institution. So we really are seeing different accountability, sort of horizontal accountability institutions kind of getting into a partnership with civil society organizations to kind of push social audits in the direction that they want to go.
So that's great. I mean, again, emphasizing the role of the Auditor General, the Supreme Audit institutions to reinforce this partnership with CSOs is a great point both of you have made. So Vivek, turning over to you, I mean, you mentioned this kind of pretty appalling number of, 12 out of 100, the average for public participation in kind of, in this kind of budget process. And Suchi also mentioned that there's a risk associated with kind of being a whistleblower, speaking up, or saying the budget's not being used well. So what can CSOs do? What can organizations like yourself do to kind of get more public participation in the process?
Well, earlier this year, we finalized a new 5-year strategy to guide the development of our work agenda. So I'm addressing this question more specifically from what is the International Budget Partnership doing about this problem together with our civil society partners across 115 countries. The new strategy focuses on empowering citizens and civil society organizations through 2 initiatives. The first initiative is called Spark. The initiative tests a new approach to advancing fiscal accountability at the country level, building on the lessons that we have learned from our work over the past 2 decades. Although we have achieved much progress in legitimizing civil society engagement in government budgeting processes over the past 2 decades, we've still not achieved truly open and inclusive budgeting systems. Ordinary citizens, especially those that are most marginalized, are frequently excluded from government budgeting processes, while some sections of society receive preferential treatment. The Spark initiative seeks to alter this status quo. The initiative will identify service delivery issues that impact citizen lives and use these issues as an entry point to promote budget policies and processes that are more inclusive and equitable. In other words, the initiative is seeking to use citizen demands to drive budget advocacy. In every country that is part of the initiative, and there are 7 such countries, Spark
Which are the countries?
It's India, Indonesia, South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and Senegal. In all these 7 countries, the Spark initiative will foster collaborations between IBP teams on the ground and local civil society organizations, focusing specifically on social movements, community networks, and faith-based organizations. These coalitions will identify service delivery issues that are of common concern and interest to broad groups of citizens. IBP will provide support to its partners to identify the budgetary reasons driving poor service delivery outcomes and to navigate the accountability ecosystem, analyze political dynamics, build broader coalitions, and to develop and implement strategies that can improve service delivery outcomes. Ultimately, the initiative seeks to bolster countervailing power in these coalitions to shape budget policies and processes in the long term. We are also supporting an initiative on open budgets in response to the new Open Budget Survey findings that show a regression in budget transparency practices, coupled with few opportunities for public participation. We know that these factors inhibit citizens and civil society organizations from entering the public budgeting arena. Citizens are also frustrated by a lack of credibility in government budgetary pronouncements, which adds to a broader narrative or feeds into a broader narrative of lack of trust in government and an urge to disengage from government and public policy debates. In turn, governments have been seeking more specific guidance from us on how they can set up public participation practices and what they can hope to achieve from these mechanisms. The Open Budget Initiative will address these challenges in 4 ways. One, we will work with 4 to 5 finance ministries who are yet to be identified to pilot mechanisms for public participation. 2, we will test ways by which civil society groups can work with supreme audit institutions to make audits more potent tools in enhancing accountability. 3, we will investigate why and how budgetary expenditures deviate from budgetary plans and how these deviations can be minimized. And 4, we'll continue to publish our flagship open budget survey every 2 years, but also look for ways by which civil society advocacy around the survey findings and recommendations can be enhanced. And for that last issue, we would need the support of all the organizations who are in this room, and I would welcome you all to join us in our efforts to open government budgets and truly transform lives.
Thanks so much, Vivek. So, Nika, the final question for you. We've heard a lot about what different organizations are doing, from the government to NGOs. I mean, can you give a few examples of what the World Bank is doing besides the GPSA to support citizen participation in the budget public finance process?
Yes, thanks, Hasmin. In addition to what the GPSA is doing, the bank is also very core in addressing this issue and supporting all the partners. I mean, like I would usually say, we're all stakeholders in this process. A core part is that a number of projects are now community-driven CDD projects, community-driven development projects. And what that means is that we're developing projects with the communities. And the requirement for such projects is that the community has to be part of the planning, the development of the project, and the implementation of the projects. So this is a core part of one of the things we are doing. In addition, we are beginning to have a number of citizens engagement projects itself. I mean, I just finished an assignment in in Afghanistan, as you know, and we had, I think it's about $200 million US invested in citizens engagement projects. And as the name implies, it means the citizens have to be engaged in all the process of the project. And I was part of the planning, the preparation, and the implementation before I left. So we had citizens not just in the capital city, but in so many subnational parts of the government. So the core part is that we are not only involving with the national governments, we are involving subnational governments. And I think that's where you can actually have greater involvement of citizens, CSOs, and other core stakeholders. Additionally, on the diagnostic level, one of the teams that I manage, the Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability team, PEFA assessment, many of us might have heard of it, are also exploring, the possibility of including citizen engagement as a core part. I mean, there's a part of it right now, but we are thinking of expanding it so that the government knows that this is something, and the PEFA assessment is a widely accepted international PFI. I call it a health check in public financial management. So, I mean, we're trying to expand it so that the government will know that this is a core part of what would make them to, have a check or a pass on a PFA assessment. So I think this is very core. And finally, on a digital governance perspective, we're also now expanding not just to the national level, but supporting subnational levels in digital governance. And that is going to support transparency and involvement of more people, or knowledge to more people on what is going on in government.
Great, thank you very much, Nika. So you've all been very quiet. You've sat and listened to all of us up here talk about different aspects of public financial management, from transparency to accountability to how do you work with audit agencies. So now, your chance to ask our wonderful panel any questions that you might have. Simon, we have the roving mics. Okay, I see one hand over there. I see a hand at the back. And I see one hand there. Okay, over to you, sir. Can you get a mic over here, Simon? Oh, Yasha?
This gentleman here?
Yeah. We'll take 3 questions at a time.
Thank you very much.
You do this.
Please introduce yourself.
My name is Andrew Lavalley. I work in Sierra Leone, the Institute for Governance Reform. Thank you very much. It's a great panel, and I think I was in the 10% and gradually moving up. The topic itself, public finance and social accountability, it's very important. But the question I want to throw at the panel is how much is the state contributing? Because we seem to be much more concerned about the accountability of a government rather than the accountability of other players. And coming from a school teaching family in Africa, in a fragile state context, I know that if a child fails an exam, the mother or the father of that child is more driven emotionally by that failure than any government or any donor. If a child is sick, the mother or the father is more driven by that circumstance than any government or the donor. So what we normally set aside is what are families giving? What is the diaspora contributing? I live in a country where 35% of schools are being taken care of by communities. They are not in government systems. So how, the more we push social accountability at frontiers in fragile contexts, the more we risk the situation where the situation can even decline because the state is already weak. So how do we extend the authority of the state to become that convener of accountability systems? For example, we don't even know what is the diaspora contributing to education and healthcare. So my question is, some of these tools can apply differently in different contexts. So in the fragile state context, what do you think should be the role of a state, and what is social accountability in a fragile state? Thank you.
Okay, so that's a very good question. So we had a question in the back.
Asmin, we're going to do this.
I saw that one first. So.
Okay.
No, at the back over there, Yasha.
Yeah,
by the door.
Thank you, the panel, for the excellent and thought-provoking discussion. My name is Sean Nam, and I work in the health sector. I have at the bank. I have a question about the entry point for CSO to do social auditing at the lower level. My take is that we need to do the social auditing of public finance at different level, right? Not at national level, but I mean on level in the system. And my take is that the further we go down the system, it's more difficult for CSO to do the social auditing, because lower level, they're not willing to open the book. And I think there are two dimensions to social auditing. Number one is auditing the services and auditing the book. And I think in the health sector, auditing the services is the easier part, right? You can interview the patient to check if the health worker were there were drugs available, or sometimes you can even send in people as a fake patient to check the situation in the health facility. But when it comes to all social auditing of the book at the lower level, I think that's extremely difficult. So my question for the panel is, what is the entry point for CSO to do social auditing of the book at the lower level, especially in the regulatory framework that is not amenable to do so? Thank you.
Good question. Simon, do we have a question over here?
Yes. My name is Tago. I'm coming from Ethiopia. I'm working in the Ministry of Finance. I think one of the questions is already mentioned by the previous speaker, whether this social audit link with the performance audit, because already the colleagues mentioned that how you audit report, your social audit report, disseminated to the public. What are the public reactions? The second is to the speaker for Nepal. There is say-so engagement in budget preparation and implementation, if I am not mistaken. At what level of say-so engaged in the budget preparation in Nepal? Thank you very much.
Can you repeat that question? It wasn't particularly clear.
At what level?
At what level? Yeah. Oh. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a question on how to deal with FCV particular situations where a lot of resources come from communities. We have a question on, do we look at the services or the books? And then we have a specific question on the what level for Mr. Tankar Sharma. Suchi, I'm going to ask you a little bit from your own experience. So what were you guys doing in India? Were you looking at the services or the books?
Okay. No, I think these are definitely great questions. In terms of the entry point for social audits in India, we've chosen to enter at the local level because a lot of movements. This is a civil society strategy, right? So it evolved on the ground, and it evolved in relation with groups who live in villages or communities where their interface with the government is usually, you have to deal with either a local elected elite or a government official who won't treat you as an equal. It doesn't matter whether you live in a democratic country or not, and whether they vote or not. On a day-to-day interaction, they're not considered equal. The social audit process as it evolved in India, the entry point was the village, because that's where the workers and peasants were working on large-scale public works programs, but also that is where they were not getting paid for the work that they were doing. So they chose to organize there, locally. And the social audit emerged as a strategy which looked at both things. So they were concerned with enforcement of minimum wages, which you could call a service. But they were also concerned with sort of, looking at the books, because one of the things they said was that if I have worked on a work site, and if I was to tell you that I know exactly why I have not been paid and where the corruption has happened, it's my word against an official record. So I need to see the books, and I need to be able to juxtapose this reality, which is my reality, which is the denial of minimum wage to me, with what is mentioned in a government document, right? So the social audit process is a 5-step process, and access to information is very important to organize social audits. And that's why the initial part of the struggle in India was to get a Right to Information Act, because the Colonial Official Secrets Act denied access to information, doesn't matter if you were a citizen or not. So I think the link between transparency and accountability comes together with participation in a social audit process, because you're actually you're gathering government information, but as many of you would know, if you look at an official record, you can't instantly make sense of it. It has to be simplified. It has to be translated, demystified before it is shared with somebody, right? And that sharing needs to take place where that person lives. So in this case, a village. We needed to go to work sites with the labor lists, which had names of people, the number of days they had worked, how much they had gotten paid, and talk to them and say, did you actually work on this website, on this work site, and did you get paid? And the stories we heard were, no, I was not in this village when the work happened. Yes, I worked for 4 weeks, but I haven't seen a single penny. So these testimonies, these verification stories that we were coming up would not have come up if no one had taken the labor list and gone to the laborer and said, did you actually get paid or not? But then, if you just leave it at that, it's not sufficient, because that's the exchange, that's the interaction between the civil society activist and the worker. You need to then convene a public forum where you need to contest, and you need to actually interrogate what's in the government documents, in the presence of officials, in the presence of ombudsmen and the media, to actually get to a point where you start to say government officials pulling out wads of cash and laying it on the table and apologizing for stealing people's wages, right? But so it's the social audit is not a one-step solution. That is, you pass a law and everyone's going to start doing what they're supposed to do. It's an ongoing process. It's a consistent struggle. You have to make it work. And the last bit, to connect with, how does it link with a performance audit? So typically performance audits look at government documents. They look at budgets, and they look at whether the money was spent or not. And at least in the case of India, the Comptroller Auditor General said to us that actually in our performance audits, the missing link is the voice of the citizen, where we're not able to verify whether or not this money which was allocated and then is shown to us as being spent actually made any difference. And we're, within our mandate, unable to go to local government institutions and ask them to produce this information, to verify this information. But you as civil society, using the social audit, using the right to information, can do that. And that's where the linkages between civil society and the audit institutions have developed.
Nick, I'm going to get you to respond to the FCV question. Then, have you worked? You worked in Sierra Leone as well, right? At one point. Yes. Yeah.
I did. So I'll try to respond to Andrew's question on, well, you were specific to Sierra Leone, but I'll probably try to use another country experience. I guess the core part of it is we are all stakeholders in this process, and I probably said that in my introduction. So whether at the subnational level, the states like we call it in West Africa, yeah, subnational level, national level, diaspora, we are all stakeholders. Now, on an education project in South Sudan, what we try to do is get the people at the subnational level to make what we call counterpart funds. Now, I mean, you keep wondering, these people don't have money, and you're asking them to make funds. It doesn't have to be in cash. It actually works better when it's in kind, and this particular one was in kind. And what did they do? I mean, the funding was supposed to support the building of a school, and the parents would go and volunteer, to, mold blocks, or be part of doing the building or whatever. And what did that help us to achieve? They knew they were part of the process, so nobody can misuse the facilities. So they were part of the accountability. That's the core thing we're trying to achieve. So, I mean, for God's sake, I was part of doing the work. So I have to make sure I'm part of making sure this thing works for the children. So they are part of their children's education. They are part of making sure things move. So I think it's just looking for not so much contribution, but finding people to, be responsible, to, contribute, to take ownership. And, I mean, you'll agree with me that irrespective of how much you put into a particular thing, you are very concerned about what I've contributed and the fact that this thing needs to work very well. So I think at the subnational level, making people to be part of the process in whichever way will be a core part of ensuring that this accountability is actually enshrined.
Thank you. Mr. Tankashama, if you could respond to the questions from my colleague from Ethiopia.
I would respond to the question regarding the social accountability. Government or public enterprise in entities are supposed to be run based on the specified objectives and targets to fulfill the responsibility or accountability what has been envisaged. If it lacks fulfilling accountability, people raise price, and people feel that government is not doing or the entity is not doing as expected. That means it is not usual. So government financial development performance or other performance is reviewed by the oversight agencies like Auditor General or other oversight agencies would be in the country. They reflect the real situation of the institutions or the government, what really has to do and what the outcome or the result. The gap between the expected and the result would be the deficiency or to fulfill the weaknesses. So if those things has to be corrected in the due course of actions, it would be, I think, weighted by the people and from the oversight agencies for some time. But if it does not correct it at that time, the people even and the oversight agency also have to think the alternatives to create pressure or to compel them to or force them to open the eye. So for this purpose, in our country, we conduct accountability assessment or evaluation of each and every entities. Ministry to the local level, ABCD will be graded. Not only financial aspects will be reviewed, other non-financial aspects also will be reviewed, really to identify the real gap or the weakness of the institutions. For example, some of the institutions may be very fair in financial matters, record keeping and so on, but would not be in managerial aspect, would not be in, to accomplish their core business, or would not be to service delivery provision and so on. So we have developed 4 or 5 indicators to evaluate exactly in which field the public has weaknesses, and we really recommend them to correct in the future. So this is one of the mechanism. So if it is not really corrected in due course, then in that case the civil society or people really raise the issues, which will be, I think, very much some sort of pressure group will be formed, and later on, in some cases, it would be difficult to correct in a very short period of time, because there could be some sort of policy level of issues. There could be some sort of very complicated issues. In that case, many of really realize that, but in general, if that is with the negligence or with the non-compliance, some sort of non-accountability or not fulfilling accountability, in that case, the people voice will be the final, I think. Regarding the one colleague asked about the involvement of CSOs and his label. We try to involve from policy formulation, planning, execution, and follow-up in audit in all tier of government, specifically in development activities and the programs operated in the field level. It would not be possible to engage the civil societies in a very big and mega projects or the multi-year projects, but for small programs and projects implemented in the field level, that would be better, and we are doing as in this principle. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So we're about to be yanked off the panel. Vivek, I'm going to give you the final word. Any of the three questions you want to respond to?
Sure. I mean, I'm struck by how many in different fora with different audiences, there is a question that comes out about the feasibility of exercises like social accountability, or even their desirability in particular kinds of country contexts or levels of government, etc., whether it should be driven by government or civil society. When it comes to the fragile states, we are often told by especially governments that we first need to get our systems in place. We need to have those reforms so that we can have appropriate public financial management systems in place. Then we'll think about transparency and accountability. But those reforms can take 10 years and 20 years and longer, and are almost never completed, and transparency and accountability gets left behind. Even though in those countries one could argue that social accountability is absolutely essential because people's lives are being lost when available resources are not being spent for the purposes that they have been allocated. There is a danger for, in fragile states, around violence against local communities that demand accountability from government. So it is something to be done with caution. It's fine for us to sit here and push for social accountability in fragile country context, but as Suchi highlighted, even in a country like India, when there have been activists or local laypersons who have sought out information, when the state does not protect them, then vested interests can push back with tremendous levels of violence that can cost lives. So one has to be also cautious and strategic in how one builds up systems for social accountability so that people don't have to pay those prices. Interestingly, people, individuals and civil society organizations in countries like the US and Western Europe have sometimes questioned us on why we include public participation indicators in our open budget survey. They argue that those indicators or formal mechanisms for public participation are not relevant in their country context because their elected representatives are generally viewed as being responsive to the needs of constituents and take up constituent concerns using their formal oversight powers. But we have seen how there has been an emergence of populist movements in both the left and right alike, like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party movement, which shows that there is, in fact, a hunger for mass participation even in advanced economies, although there is a question that remains to be addressed as to how these mechanisms can be developed in a manner so that they interact with the existing representative structures in ways that minimizes any contradictions.
Okay. Please join me in giving a big hand of support to our panel. And they are around, so please feel free to walk up to them and ask your specific questions to any of them that you have. Thank you so much.
So thank you very much.